I kicked my parents out of my house, and I can't shake the guilt. I kicked my parents out of my house, and I can't shake the guilt. After a severe depressive episode, I voluntarily admitted myself to a hospital due to thoughts. During that time, my parents temporarily moved in to take care of my dogs and the house. My father assured me, and my partner, that they would stay for 2 years before moving to North Carolina. However, once I was discharged, I realized the situation was not what I had expected. My mother had taken over my master bedroom and had started decorating the house with her belongings. I had told her to make herself at home, but this felt like a complete takeover. From that moment on, my partner and I felt like we were walking on eggshells every day. Nothing we did was ever right in her eyes. She constantly belittled us, yelled at us, and controlled even the smallest details. For example, one day we took out the trash when it was full. Instead of a simple thank you, she got angry, saying we should have pulled the sides of the bag to fit an extra inch or two of trash. Then, she called us idiots. That was just a small example of how controlling and humiliating she was. The final straw was when I saw her post on Facebook, referring to my house as my new home. I was in shock when I confronted them. I found out my father had told my mother they would stay permanently while telling me it would only be 2 years. We had been completely deceived. As grateful as I was for their initial help, I knew I had to set a boundary. I told them they had to leave. Since then, I have felt overwhelming guilt. They came to support me in my darkest moment, but I couldn't tolerate their presence. Yet at the same time, my mental health has significantly improved since they left. My mother's behavior had even started triggering my thoughts again. With the house empty, I began to notice the small changes in my daily routine that showed just how suffocating their presence had been. I could wake up without the fear of my mother criticizing my every move. I could cook without her inspecting every ingredient I used, or how I washed the dishes afterward. Still, the guilt lingered. My partner tried to reassure me, saying I had done nothing wrong, that my parents had crossed a line they never should have. But I kept wondering if I could have handled the situation differently. Maybe I could have talked to them before it reached the point of asking them to leave. Maybe I should have endured it a little longer. The guilt wasn't just about the decision I made, but also about the fact that, deep down, I felt good without them. What kind of child was I if their absence brought me peace? I hated myself for thinking it, but it was the truth. In my mind, part of me knew my relationship with my parents had never been truly healthy, but another part resisted accepting that I needed distance to heal. Days passed, and while my mental health improved, my parents didn't stop trying to contact me. My mother sent passive-aggressive messages, reminding me of what they had done for me, implying that I was ungrateful. My father, quieter, sent short messages asking how I was, never mentioning what had happened. I didn't know how to respond. I felt that anything I said would either make them angrier or reopen the conflict. One afternoon, while checking my inbox, I saw a message from my aunt. She told me that my parents had shared their version of the story. According to them, I had kicked them out for no reason after everything they had done for me. They said my partner had manipulated me into pushing them away, that we were being cruel. Reading that hurt me deeply. I knew that sooner or later the family would get involved, but I hadn't expected to be painted as the villain so quickly. I decided I needed to talk to someone about the Samion outside the situation. I made an appointment with my therapist and told them everything. They listened carefully and helped me see what I hadn't wanted to accept. I had grown up in an environment where control, manipulation, and emotional blackmail were normalized. My parents weren't acting like concerned parents. They were acting like people who had lost control over something they believed belonged to them. My house, my life. That session helped me realize that the guilt didn't belong to me. It wasn't my responsibility to make them feel comfortable at the expense of my well-being. It wasn't my duty to sacrifice my mental health for them. But knowing it and feeling it were two very different things. Over time, I began to accept the distance. I responded to my father's messages with short, polite answers. I ignored my mother when her messages were manipulative. But with each passing day, I felt the relationship falling apart even more. I didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. And part of me feared that if I reopened that door, history would repeat itself. Then, something unexpected happened. One night, I received a message from an unknown number. We need to talk. It's urgent. My heart raced. I didn't recognize the number, but there was something about those words that unsettled me deeply. The unknown message remained on my phone screen, casting a faint glow in the darkness of my room. We need to talk. It's urgent. My stomach tightened. I didn't recognize the number, but the tone of the message filled me with unease. Could it be my parents? My aunt? Or someone else tangled in this complicated web of family relationships? My first instinct was to ignore it. I didn't want to open another door I wasn't prepared to walk through. But curiosity, or maybe the need to understand, it the best of me. Who are you? I typed. The response came almost immediately. I can't explain it here. Can we meet? I hesitated. Everything inside me screamed that this was a bad idea. But something told me that whoever this was had information I needed to hear. After a few minutes of indecision, I replied, "Where?" The reply took a while to arrive. "At the cafe on 8th Street, tomorrow at p.m. Nothing else. No name, no clues, just a meeting in a public place. Uncertainty settled in my chest as I stared at the screen. The next day, my anxiety grew with every passing hour. My partner noticed my nervousness, but I didn't want to say anything until I knew what I was dealing with. I didn't want to worry them more than necessary. I arrived at the cafe a few minutes before 7. I scanned the place cautiously. Several tables were occupied, but no one seemed familiar. I sat in a corner, my back against the wall, eyes fixed on the door. A few minutes later, a middle-aged woman walked in and scanned the room until her eyes met mine. She approached with a firm stride and sat across from me without waiting for an invitation. "Thank you for coming," she said in a measured voice. I didn't recognize her. Her face was stern, but there was a sense of urgency in her gaze. "Who are you?" I asked. She sighed as if she already knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. "My name is Elena. I worked with your father many years ago." My mind raced. My father didn't talk much about his work life. He had always been secretive about his past. "And what do you want from me?" I asked, making no effort to hide my distrust. Elena glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "I don't know how much you know about him, but there are things you need to learn. Things he will never tell you." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "Your father is not who you think he is." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to respond, but she raised a hand, stopping me. "Let me explain. There are things coming to light. Things that could affect your life more than you realize. I wouldn't be telling you this if it weren't necessary." My breathing quickened. I wanted to get up and leave, but something in her eyes made me stay. "What things?" I managed to ask in a shaky voice. Elena pulled a manila envelope from her bag and slid it across the table toward me. "Here are the proofs. I can't tell you more right now. Read this. And if you decide you want to know more, contact me." I stared at the envelope without touching it. My instincts told me that once I opened it, there would be no turning back. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Elena gave me a sad smile. "Because the truth always finds a way out, and I think it's time you knew it." Without another word, she stood up and walked out of the cafe. I was left alone with the envelope in front of me, feeling like my world was about to change in ways I never imagined. The manila envelope remained in front of me, motionless, waiting to be opened. My hands trembled as I picked it up. A part of me wanted to throw it away and move on, pretend none of this had happened, but another, stronger part pushed me to open it, to face whatever was inside. I took a deep breath and broke the seal. Inside were several documents, newspaper clippings, copies of emails, and what appeared to be a report. As I flipped through the pages, my vision blurred. Names I recognized, places that felt familiar, connected in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. My father was not who he claimed to be. The documents spoke of shady dealings, suspicious investments, and worst of all, a legal case I had never heard of. His name appeared in multiple reports linked to a financial fraud investigation. How had I never known about this? I read and reread the papers, searching for any sign that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the information was too detailed, too concrete to be a simple error. My hands grew clammy as I turned the pages. I felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. When I finally looked up, I realized I had been sitting in the cafe for over an hour. The waitress watched me curiously, as if wondering if I needed anything. I shook my head, gathered the papers, and placed them back into the envelope. I needed time to process this. I stepped outside, feeling as if everything around me had become unreal. People walked past me. Oblivious to the storm raging inside me, I wandered aimlessly, gripping the envelope tightly against my chest, until my phone vibrated in my pocket. A message. It was from my mother. "Son, please, we need to talk. I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand. Please, come home." My heart pounded. Did she know what I had just discovered? Was she involved in this? For years, I had felt that my family was hiding secrets, but I had never imagined they could be this serious. My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know if I wanted to reply. Before I could decide, my phone vibrated again. Another message, but this time from an unknown number. "Don't talk to them yet. Don't trust anyone." The air caught in my lungs. Someone was watching me. I looked around, scanning the street, but all I saw were indifferent faces. My hands clenched into fists. I had stumbled into something far bigger than I had imagined. And the worst part was that I had no idea who I could trust. The unknown message lingered in my mind like a persistent echo. Don't talk to them yet. Don't trust anyone. Who was the person behind those words? How did they know what was happening? And most importantly, what did yet mean? It was a warning, but also an indication that, at some point, I would have to face the truth. The manila envelope was still in my hand. As my steps carried me home almost automatically, my breathing was heavy, and with each heartbeat, I felt the pressure mounting. When I reached my front door, I paused for a moment before turning the key in the lock. Something inside me told me that once I crossed that threshold, nothing would ever be the same. I entered cautiously, placing the envelope on the dining table. My partner looked at me from the couch with a frown. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to tell them everything, but at the same time, I wasn't sure if I should, if I really couldn't trust anyone. What did that mean for my relationship? "It's just been a long day," I muttered. Their worried gaze followed me as I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water. I drank in big gulps, trying to steady myself. But the feeling of paranoia was still there, lurking at the back of my mind. My phone vibrated again. Another message from the unknown number. "I need to see you. There's more you need to know. PM. The park near your house. Come alone." My stomach twisted. Every fiber of my being told me this was dangerous. But I had already come too far to turn back now. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:45 p.m. If I went, it meant diving even deeper into this mystery. If I didn't, I would live with the doubt forever. I decided to go. I threw on a jacket and left without saying a word. The night air was cold, and every shadow on the street seemed longer than usual. I arrived at the park with 10 minutes to spare, and stood there, scanning my surroundings. Then I saw him, a middle-aged man, wearing a low cap and a long coat, sat on one of the benches. His posture was tense, as if he were waiting for something. When I approached, he lifted his gaze and studied me for a moment before speaking. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, do you?" I shook my head. "No, but I want to know." The man sighed and glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "Your father wasn't just involved in financial fraud. That was only the surface. There are people who don't want you to know the truth, and they'll do whatever it takes to make sure you don't find out." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of people?" The man looked at me intently. "The kind that won't stop at anything." Suddenly, the sound of an engine roared in the distance. We both turned our heads just in time to see a black car pull up across the street. My heart pounded. "They found us," the man murmured. "You need to run, now." The car accelerated in our direction. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate, he just reacted. My legs moved before my mind could even process it. Adrenaline surged through my veins as the sound of screeching tires chased me. The man who had called me to the park ran in the opposite direction. But the black car wasn't after him. They were after me. I darted into the trees, hoping to lose them in the darkness. My lungs burned, and my heart pounded so hard, it felt like it might explode in my chest. In the distance, I saw the glow of a streetlight. If I could reach a busy road, I might have a chance to escape. But before I could get there, I heard the sound of a car door opening, and hurried footsteps behind me. "Stop," a voice shouted. I ignored the command and kept running. I heard a metallic click, followed by the sharp crack of something hitting a nearby tree. A gunshot. They were shooting at me. I turned left, searching for any way out. My feet caught on a root, and I crashed to my knees. Pain. I couldn't stop. I clumsily got back up and kept running, feeling warm blood sliding down my leg. I didn't know if it was from the fall or something worse, but I had no time to find out. I reached a side street, where a few cars passed now and then. Without thinking, I stumbled into the road, forcing a driver to slam on the brakes. The car door swung open, and a man stepped out, cursing. "Are you insane? Help me," I gasped, my voice ragged. "They're after me." The man hesitated, looking behind me. I turned my head and saw the black car had stopped at a distance. Its high beams blinded me for a second, and then, just like that, it turned in the opposite direction and vanished into the darkness. The driver frowned. "Who's after you?" I didn't know what to say. I was too shaken. "Please, just get me out of here," was all I could manage. The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I climbed into the car, my body trembling uncontrollably. The engine roared to life, taking us away from the park and from the nightmare I had just lived through. I had no idea who these people were or why they were after me. But one thing was certain: I knew too much now, and there was no turning back. "Where do you need to go?" the driver asked. I thought of my house but immediately dismissed the idea. If they knew who I was, they surely knew where I lived. I couldn't risk going back there. I pulled out my phone, hesitating over who I could contact. My partner. No, I couldn't involve them. My mother. I didn't trust her after everything I had discovered. The only name that came to mind was Ellen Athwoman, who had given me the envelope. "Take me to this address," I said, showing him the location of the cafe where we had met earlier. The driver nodded and sped up. During the ride, my mind replayed everything that had just happened. My pulse pounded in my ears, a constant reminder of how close I had been to danger. When we arrived at the cafe, the street was nearly empty. I stepped out of the car, thanking the driver, without giving any explanations. I scanned my surroundings, making sure I hadn't been followed, then stepped inside. The cafe was about to close, but the same waitress from earlier recognized me and let me sit at a secluded table. I ordered a glass of water, trying to steady myself. Minutes dragged by until the door finally opened, and Elena walked in, tension written all over her face. "What happened?" she asked, sitting across from me. "I was followed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They shot at me. I don't know who they are, but they were in a black car, and they knew I was in the park." Elena closed her eyes and exhaled, as if she had expected this. "You shouldn't have gone alone," she said gravely. "Now there's no doubt you're on their radar." "Who are they?" I asked desperately. "What do they want from me?" Elena glanced around before leaning in closer. "They're the same people who wanted to silence your father. Not just because of the financial fraud. There's something much bigger behind all of this. Something he knew. And now you're starting to uncover it." My mind struggled to process it all. Every time I thought I had reached the bottom of the truth, another layer of secrets emerged. "You have to decide," Elena continued. "You can run, hide, and hope they forget about you, or you can face them and uncover the truth." The question lingered in the air. I knew there was no easy option, and, worst of all, I knew that my decision wouldn't just affect me, it would affect the people I cared about. Before I could answer, the sound of a phone interrupted the moment. Elena pulled out her phone, looked at the screen and went pale. "We have to go," she whispered urgently. "Now." We left the cafe without looking back. Elena walked at a brisk pace, wasting no time, and I followed without asking questions. There was something in her expression, a mix of urgency and fear, that told me our time was running out. "Where are we going?" I asked between breaths, struggling to keep up with her pace. "Somewhere safe," she replied, without looking at me. "We can't stay here." The sound of a car turning the corner made us freeze in place. It was a dark sedan, with no visible plates. Elena grabbed my arm and pulled me into an alley. We pressed ourselves against the wall, crouching low. As the car drove by slowly, as if searching for something or someone, I felt my heart hammer against my chest. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, the car continued down the street, and Elena nudged me to keep moving. We walked for several blocks, blending into the pedestrian traffic. Finally, we reached an old building. its fob worn down, its windows covered in dust. Elena pulled a key from her pocket and slid it into the lock of a side door. The inside was dark and smelled of old wood and dampness. "Well, be safe here for now," she said, locking the door behind her. The place looked like an abandoned apartment, with old furniture and boxes stacked in the corners. She turned on a lamp inside, as if she could finally relax. "Even just a little. I need you to tell me everything you know so far," she said. Sitting on a rickety chair, I took a deep breath and started talking. I told her about the manila envelope, the man in the park, the black car that followed me, the gunshot. With every word I spoke, I felt more trapped in this web of secrets I didn't fully understand. Elena nodded grimly when I finished. "Just as I feared," she murmured. "I knew this could happen." "What exactly is this?" I asked, frustration rising in my voice. "All you've given me are vague warnings. I need answers, Elena." She ran a hand over her face, exhausted. Then she stood up and pulled a small device from her bag, placing it on the table. "This is a signal blocker," she said, "so they can't listen in." She switched it on and met my eyes. "Your father was involved in something much bigger than financial fraud. His company was a front for money laundering, but behind that, there was a trade of classified information. This wasn't just white-collar crime, it was high-level corporate espionage. And now, those same players think you have something that could destroy them." My legs felt weak, and I sank onto a dusty old couch. "Are you saying my father was a spy?" "Not exactly," she replied. "But he worked with people who were. And now that he's off the radar, they think you might have inherited something that puts them at risk. That's why they're following you. That's why they tried to kill you." Images of my childhood flooded my mind. My father working late, his sudden business trips. I had always thought he was just another businessman. But now everything took on a new meaning. "What do they want from me?" I asked in a low voice. "They want to make sure you don't know anything. And if they find out you do?" She trailed off and looked at me gravely. "They won't let you live to tell anyone." A chill ran down my spine. This was too much. I felt the urge to run, to leave all of this behind and pretend none of it was real. But I knew that wasn't an option. I was already in too deep. "So, what do we do?" I asked, feeling like my life was hanging by a thread. Elena sighed and pulled another envelope from her bag. She handed it to me. "This has a fake passport, cash, and an address. If you decide to run, this will help you start over. But if you choose to fight this, there's someone we need to see." I stared at her, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I had no idea which path to take, but I knew that whatever I chose would change my life forever. Before I could say a word, a noise at the door froze us in place. Someone had found us. The sound at the door froze us in place. Elena immediately turned off the lamp and motioned for me to stay silent. My heart pounded, echoing in my ears. A shadow passed by the dust-covered window. They had found us. Through the back exit, Elena whispered as she grabbed her bag and the envelope she had given me. We moved carefully toward the back of the apartment. Elena opened a hidden door behind a bookshelf, revealing a dark passageway. We slipped through silently, but just as the door closed behind us, we heard wood splintering. They had forced their way in. We ran. The passage led us to an alley, where a car was waiting. Elena pulled out a key and unlocked the door. "Get in," she ordered. Without hesitation, I climbed into the car. She did the same and hit the gas. Through the rearview mirror, I saw two men rushing out of the building, running toward us, but we were already too far. "They found us faster than I expected," Elena said, making a sharp turn at an intersection. "Where are we going?" I asked, still trying to catch my breath. "Somewhere you can make a decision," she answered seriously. We drove in silence for several minutes, until we arrived at an old abandoned warehouse. Elena cut the engine and turned to me. "This is your last chance. You can take the passport and the money, disappear, and start over. Or we can face them." I looked at the envelope in my hands. If I ran, maybe I could start fresh, but I would always live in fear of being found. If I stayed, I would have to confront a truth I was only beginning to understand. "I'm not running," I finally said. "I want answers." Elena gave me a faint smile of approval. "Then we'd better get ready." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "We need to meet," she said quietly, before hanging up. Half an hour later, a man arrived at the warehouse. He wore a dark suit and had a sharp, calculating gaze, like someone accustomed to dangerous situations. He introduced himself as Daniel. Your father worked with us, he said bluntly. He was a middleman in a network of confidential information. Someone betrayed him. And now they want to erase every trace of his existence, secreting his family. I swallowed hard. Who are they? Daniel sighed. People with a lot of power. Governments, corporations, people who make those who know too much disappear. Elena looked at me seriously. If you choose to move forward, you have to be ready for whatever comes next. There's no turning back. I looked at Daniel, at Elena, at the envelope containing the fake passport and money. The decision was made. Tell me what I need to do. From that moment on, my life was no longer my own. I had become part of a war fought in the shadows, where only those willing to risk everything could survive, and I had no intention of losing.